welcome everyone. It's good to have everyone here. I did already my first introduction with being muted. But it's great to have everyone here. I want to welcome all the people that are joining us in Zoom or online, live on Facebook, and of course, the speakers. We are here for the first edition of Zooming In. It's a series of talks in the framework of Foam Talent 2021, where we want to bring together two artists that have a link in their practice or in their approach to the work. And we invite a special guest to help us together reflect on the one side on the works of the artist, but also relate the topics that they work with to contemporary photography as a whole, but also what is happening in society. So the topic of tonight, or the title for the talk, is Intimacy in the Times of Social Distancing. And I'm not alone, as you see. I have three wonderful guests with me. And I'm just going to introduce them for you briefly. We have Anna Vallejo joining us from New York. Hi, Anna, how are you doing?
Hello, everyone. Doing great.
And then from Chicago, we have Leonard Suryajaya. Hi, Leonard. How are you doing?
Good.
And
excited for this.
And we have Gem from London, not far away from us. And Gem, you are our special guest because you're a woman of many talents. You're a writer, a podcaster, you're a creative director. And yeah, it's great to have you here. And I thought maybe you want to say a few words about who you are to kick this off.
Well, thank you for having me. I feel really honoured to be in the presence of two artists that I absolutely love. I am a multitasker in the world of photography. I'm a photo director. I direct Riposte magazine, which is a feminist magazine for women based in London. I write about photography for a number of different publications, including the British Journal of Photography, The Guardian, It's Nice That, Elephant Art magazine, and a whole host of others. And I also host a podcast called The Messy Truth, which is actually where I got to know Leonard. And that's all about the future of visual culture and trying to unravel the kind of messy reality of image making.
Thanks for this insight. And of course, it's you do so much, so it's difficult to condense it, but it's good to have you here and also, yeah, to learn more of your insights throughout the evening. And we're actually kicking off with Q&As with the artists, also to give everyone that might not be that familiar yet with the practice a little bit of an insight. And for this, we're starting with Gem and Leonard. So the floor is yours.
Exciting times. So I have a lot of questions for you, Leonard. So let's see how we go in our time. But I've kind of framed, I feel like Quarantine Blues, which is your project that is in the Foam Talent issue, is kind of a microcosm of your practice as a whole. If we kind of dig into some of the themes that are in there, I think it says a lot about your wider practice. So I feel like for me, Quarantine Blues is on one level acknowledging your experiences through the pandemic and how you kind of chart this erratic tempo of our psychological landscape, which speaks to notions of family and intimacy and isolation and health, as well as just the exhausting endeavour of trying to make life feel more hospitable during lockdown. And we were, and for many of us still are, kind of living in this state of suspension. And so I wondered if you could start by kind of taking us back to early 2020 and talking a little bit about the genesis of the project and what motivated it.
Yeah. So I didn't plan on making this body of work at all because I was also just finishing a 4-year project that had just concluded when I got my green card. So 2020 was my welcome to America year. It's finally the year that I'm basically feeling secure about my place in America. So in 2020, going into the pandemic, I was just not so healthy. I was due for a surgery in April. So it was just confusing time, you know? Okay, suddenly we were told to stay inside. And of course, my first response was like, fuck. Am I gonna die from COVID or am I gonna die from my sickness? So just occupying that space of like not knowing what my future will be, not knowing if I will live, basically, that kind of becomes the genesis of quarantine blues. Because as soon as we were quarantined for 2 weeks and then told that actually you have to stay inside longer, that's when I was like, okay, what can I do at home? Because I can't just wait, you know? So that's kind of like the genesis of the body of work.
And I think for me, one of the things I love about your work is that it feels so alive. And I've been thinking a lot about this in the last week, and what is it that about it that feels so alive? And I think there's just so many things, but one is the kind of elaborate staging and this way that you have this kind of beautiful tension between chaos and harmony, sort of crafted through sensory overload. I find it both like visually exciting but also kind of soothing, because the overload kind of mirrors my own sort of psyche in many ways. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the construction of the work and how you kind of, I guess to maybe narrow it, because the work kind of has 3 parts, maybe talk about how you constructed those early images that you shot in your apartment.
Yeah, for example, this photograph, which I'm standing in front of, you know, in the pandemic, it was me and my partner, Peter, in a 1-bedroom apartment in the city. And this is basically our living room. You know, like we just had gone through our phases of baking from YouTube. We tried all of those recipes. We worked out at home. And then after 2 months of it, it was just like, I cannot deal with this. Like, I cannot just bump heads with you. I cannot just argue with you for anything that I don't feel good. Then as soon as that realization came in, like, whoa, we actually need to employ ourselves with something that is fun, distracting, and positive, no matter how tough it is right now. So that's when we started putting our intention down in making photographs. So the way that we did it, we would set aside a period of time. For example, this photograph, this was our old bedroom. I allocated about 5 days to kind of dream about what can happen in the space. So that's when I started putting up those mirror tiles in the back of the window, which you can see in my studio now. So my process is really just like, okay, we have 5 days. I'm gonna spend 5 days going back and forth, figuring out what I wanna say, what I wanna do, and then setting up my lights, setting up my camera, putting in the colors that I want. And that becomes like a framework that me and my partner could follow. And that framework puts us in a team together instead of being like, I hate you, you hate me, I hate you, you hate me, I'm hungry, are you hungry? Like, what are we doing now? Let's make art, you know? So really like that impetus of wanting to work through this time in the best possible way, that was the goal. Yeah.
It's funny to talk about this image in particular, actually, because I wanted to ask you about humor, because that is kind of a lifeblood of your work. And this image in particular, I remember you saying to me, was kind of referencing the Tiger King, which was obviously massive at the beginning of lockdown. Can you talk a little bit about humor and how you use it in your work?
Yeah, I mean, you know, like I have a pretty, I don't know, I feel like my imagination can go wild sometimes, and I can get pretty dark, but humor becomes this ray of light that kind of checks out and create balance in my mind. So with that photograph, when we saw Tiger King, I was like, fuck, I am the tiger. You are the Tiger King. Because that basically was my experience going through the green card application. Because I married my partner so that we could work our lives and also our marriage so that he could help me apply to green card to prove to the government. But during that period, I felt like I was in captivity because I don't want to step on any toes. I don't want to do anything wrong. I only want to just get along so that I can get my green card and stay in America and not have to go back to Indonesia. So when I saw Tiger King, I was just like, how can I acknowledge my experience of relating to the cats? Because I'm a Leo, so like I'm a big cat as well. So, you know, just in that spirit of trying to humor myself, that's how I think I start making my work, you know? Like, I don't want to go to the studio, or I don't want to spend my time in quarantine being more angry or being more helpless, feeling powerless. So that's why I just use my power, whatever courage I can muster, whatever humor that I can make myself laugh and make my partner feel in my team. That's what I want to do and share. And now I feel like, why stop? That's what I've been doing, and I want to keep using humor. And I love humor. I would rather laugh with someone, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on in this series, right? There's like, as I said before, there's like this fraught psychological space, but there's humor, and then you're interweaving like cultural reference points. And I guess to sort of move on and talk about the second part of the project, I've decided your project is in 3 parts. You may disagree, but the first part obviously was the part that you made with Peter in your apartment, and then the second part was this really collaborative part that you had within your community, in your neighborhood, once things started to open up again briefly. And I always think about your work as a collaborative practice, because you often collaborate with your partner and your family and your friends. But Quarantine Blues was a little bit different, because you were collaborating with strangers, which is no easy feat, especially at a time of such heightened emotion and just insecurity. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what that experience was like and how it informed your practice.
Yeah. So in quarantine, I would take these online workout classes with these strangers. And we were just like, oh, hi. I never met you in real life. I would not have any interest, or I would just be too shy to even like say hi. So like somehow the pandemic with the Zoom and the online workouts, it just felt right. So for example, this photograph, prior to taking this photograph, we would hang out online just as a group to kind of go through some ideas that we can do together. So in that online Zoom, I asked them what kind of things that they want to bring to the shoot, what kind of ideas we want to execute. And we are also, I mean, I am very intrigued by that floor cleaner in the middle of the frame, just because it just reminds me of a big Zamboni. And to me, that needs to be in the photograph. And then I want everybody else to be in the space, sharing with me, and then following protocols to be 6 feet away. So really, I don't know, I felt like I am starting to understand myself more from this process, because in the past I would be so shy and afraid of just striking a conversation with anyone. But somehow after the pandemic and then interfacing the first time online, that just reminded me of how I grew up, you know, like being a millennial, like I discovered my sexuality on the computer. I have more balls on the computer than in real life. And that's what I realized, that I want to learn how to not just be courageous on the computer, but I want to be as open in real life. So really, working with strangers has its fun, but also to me, they're not so much of just like a cold, like on the street, someone, hey, come in here and stay there for 5 minutes. So in a sense, there are strangers who became my friends, but that also the framework that I go into the world. Okay, strangers in real life, some of you will be my friends, but I will take my time putting myself out there, you know?
I think as well, what's so generative and perhaps like truly central to this project is how the images really speak to mental health, a lot of different mental health kind of angles, and how they validate the sort of contradictory roller coaster and mind states that we all went through during this period of social isolation. And it wasn't just the pandemic that we were dealing with in 2020. There was obviously also a profound social justice movement, and there was also this cresting sort of anti-Asian violence and a crisis of silence around that as well. And I know this is something we've talked about before, but I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how those issues kind of intersect with the work.
Yeah, I think in pandemic, because I was sick, because I realized the extent of my mortality, I understood, okay, this body will not contain me forever. So knowing that I have a limited time on earth to do what I can with my power, I want to be effective. So really in the pandemic, I realized it's easier for me to show people what is possible than trying to change someone's mind.
Yeah.
And that is kind of the principle that I am carrying. I am a Chinese Indonesian immigrant to America. I don't vote, really. Like what I say almost don't matter, because it feels like I am just hanging by the string of my husband's privilege. But in that sense of smallness, I also realized, wait, I have all of these great things that I can do that I know I'm good at, which is making art. So I want to focus all of that energy of feeling small, doubting myself, or also feeling like I'm not worthy. I want to muster the extra courage to just put all of that energy into art making, because art making is truly what I'm really good at. Like I'm not so good at anything else. So when I realized that, I want to show, guess what, everyone? You think that there is a set path that I am to follow because I am an immigrant, I ran away from my home country. I want to show that there are ways in which I can experience life that is as fulfilling to everyone else in my own way. And in that process, I get to become who I am truly and be able to realize my power. You know, that's kind of like, that's where I'm at, really, because like it's not like I can vote for people who pays attention to queer rights, to Asian rights, to minority rights. I don't have that privilege, but what power I have, I want to use that to my mostest. And that is through making art. That's why I'm not just going to make a simple photograph of someone standing in front of a white wall or a black wall, because that is a waste of my potential to me. That's how I'm thinking about it. Oh my God, I'm getting nervous, I'm getting red, but yes.
You're doing great. So in my mind, the third sort of era of this project is the most recent work you've been making, like self-measure and learning to self-love, which feels like, this sort of new phase and you kind of grappling with this newfound relationship with yourself and centered around like a new value system. And I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about that new work.
Yeah, and you know, like I agree thinking of this body of work as a 3 parts, because earlier this year, I had to leave my old apartment and move into a new space because the apartment wanted to renovate that unit so that they could rent it out higher. And I'd been there for 5 years, so I just felt so betrayed by that. But lo and behold, it's actually a blessing. So I moved into my new home, and then I finally realized, whoa, I had been living life in isolation even prior to the pandemic, just because the confusions that I carry become this blinders that didn't allow me to see with clarity. And being in a new space, I get to look back at my experiences. The photograph on the left in 2000, that was my first experience in America. Mm-hmm. As a family, we came to visit, and then I moved to America in 2006. And then 2012, I was an undergrad in California. So just thinking, and early on in my work, I was always confused as far as, why do I look like this? You know, why am I born into this body? Why am I not white? Why am I not Pacific Islander like the rest of Indonesia? Why am I this minority that nobody seems to care about? Because my grandfather also fled from China to Indonesia in the 20s, before Indonesia was independent, when the Dutch was there. So I felt like my whole history is always people rejecting me. So now after the pandemic, after moving to a new house, it's like, okay, I need to be my own parent now. Like, I need to love myself so that I can use the rest of my life being productive. Mm-hmm. So really that's what these two photographs were about to me. Like thinking about where I'm from, but also approaching my life and myself through a different value system that I gathered myself, that allows me to like say goodbye to old ways that hold me back. Yeah, because the confusions of being a minority, you know, like I don't know, am I to live my life the Christian way or the Buddhist way, the Muslim way, Asian way, white people way, or like what am I gonna do? So really, like all of those confusions in the past was just so heavy. But with the pandemic, with being sick, with moving to a new home, I was able to kind of like process all of that through art making. And now I'm sharing my insights with everyone.
Well, thank you for sharing and being so candid. I guess what I would say is what I love about your work is how you kind of, your method and is kind of your evidence of the journey that you're going through. And you kind of, I guess it's important to stress that suffering is never your main protagonist. You're really coming at this, and kind of your mastery is your ability to acknowledge and metabolize trauma through picture making, but while also leaning on this sense of strength and power and optimism. It's so much about resilience building for me. But with that, I will hand back over to Anna and Amelie.
Thank you so much. And it was great, of course, to get this insight. And now, Anna, it's also great, of course, to have you here. And then I think it was when we paired you and Leonard, of course, that's something that we do, and we thought it's an interesting exchange. But even listening now, I think this idea how the pandemic has, for both of you, like propelled or the practice that you do and the themes that you already work with, it's really interesting, intriguing, and important also to take a closer look at. And with you, your work, of course, neuromatic that you handed into the call, it has all these notes of dealing with anxiety around separation, also this idea of skin hunger, the touch. And it also then goes even a step further and uses to connect online, like to do a survey, to reach out to others and make the project bigger than just your own internal or reflection. And so there are also already some parallels between the projects. But I thought maybe as a first question, can you talk a bit about the project where it started, Neuromatic, because you're working on it for quite a while already, and how this new phase during the pandemic has maybe shifted it or added a new layer to it?
Yes, of course. So I started, the idea of Neuromantic was around 2019 when I applied to the ICP, to the International Center of Photography. And that's when I moved to New York in 2019. And I had like I knew conceptually what I wanted to do. it was also my first like truly personal conceptual project. So it has all been like the project where I learn and I find myself, kind of like what Leonard was saying. And like, yeah, I definitely see the parallels, because basically I came here to New York and out of like a hunger to grow, but also because in my home country, living from art is very difficult. So it was kind of like trying to like do something better and like for myself. So I completely understand everything Leonard was explaining right now about being a minority, but also like not feeling safe, you know, like then the pandemic hit, which was amazing in sense of like going inwards and going deeper. But the feeling of being in a foreign country and like not even knowing what's going to happen with your status financially, just anything, like it's like all the basis of security vanished, and it made me understand the whole immigrant experience like to a very intense level. So during this process also my anxiety like spiked, and like initially the project was going to be about love addiction, or that's what it is on the surface. I was very intrigued about why this was like such a fantasy, such an important thing in my life, but like to the point that it would disrupt other things. Like I would get immersed in these like impossible loves or whatever. But it was also interesting that whenever I talk to friends and everything, it's such a common ground. Like many times we want something that's unattainable. So that was the initial, like that was the starting point. And then during the pandemic, like as I was explaining, everything became amplified, and anxiety hit me to an extent that I did not like know. And the only way out was through kind of. So it was kind of like having to go inwards, but also trying like, how do you communicate what a feeling is? How do you communicate like what's going on inside? Like everything looks fine on the outside, but how can we have like a society that can also validate and like take into account what's going in, right? Like what's going on inside, because every second of our existence, there's an emotional tone to everything that we perceive. So like we've decided that some things are objective and like this is the way that photography represents reality or objective reality, but in every single second and instant of that moment, everyone's experiencing and reacting differently according to what's going on inside. So I guess I really like what Leonard was saying about like bringing the inside out. I think that's kind of what I want to do as well, and like started doing in this project.
Yeah, and I think what is interesting already when you talk now, it also becomes evident like how many different, you know, you're talking about neuroscience, psychology, philosophy. There's all of these concepts, they're informing your work. And now that, for example, in this image, you can also see then how it will that translates into the photographic practice. So how you found a way of also layering the image with these different tones and theories. And could you maybe talk a bit more about that? Also, how to access these different types of knowledge? You have also a background with biology. Can you speak about how this layering and these different influences come together in your practice?
Yeah, I would say like the three like biggest layers or categories would be collaboration, the science or like the research, and psychology as well, and the photographic part, which also involves a kind of collaboration like on one-on-one with the participants. So like the big large scale collaboration is the data part, which I think we'll go into in a little bit. And then like, wait, what was the second one I said?
The second one you said was the science.
Yes, the science. I studied biology, so I do come from a biological background, and I was always I wanted to be a neuroscientist before I became a biologist, but like that didn't work out. Everything's way too like pragmatic and specific. Math is not my stronghold. So it's funny because I moved to photography initially in documentary practice, and people would ask me if I want to photograph animals or things like this. Like I never found the connection, but now I see that like I think and approach projects very scientifically. And then lastly, like, it was like figuring out the visual language. So it's like the layering and all that. It was like, before I started to master more the light, I've always seen color. Like, color for me, I don't have to think about. It's just like a visceral sensation. And I realize I can collage very easily. Like, it's just like, for me, putting a photo, it's even easier to treat photography as a material, kind of, than as a final like product. So the more I can grab and like photograph and print and intervene, like, that's where I'm really flowing. And then the subjects of the people I photographed, it was all very intuitive, not planned, but now it makes sense. It was either lovers that I had dated or like that I was really infatuated with, or friends and family members who had very similar lives, like experiences to mine. So had been going through very similar love experiences.
Yes, thank you for like elaborating on that. And I think what could also be interesting, we were speaking earlier, and this is also why you two actually are a good pair. You also mentioned the practice of healing in connection with your work, and of course how you approach it like a scientist. You have these three areas. You try to get an understanding and grasp what is happening. Maybe to say a few words about how you relate it to this process of also healing through this practice.
Yeah, it was like a need for me, you know, like, and for Leonard as well. But like, the pandemic started, and like the project, which was more like on the surface, turned very big and real. And it was like my only way out to deal with all the anxiety and like the extreme emotions. Like, at the same time, obviously it's a holistic approach. Like, it's not like I can just do the project and be better and feel better. I also have to do therapy. I watch my diet. Like, it's an integral work, but it's just realizing that art can in fact make us feel better and heal. So yeah, I do think I've reached a better point after all this process.
Yeah, and I've also always find how, you know, as a viewer looking at the works, I think a lot of this carefulness, this putting it together, the stitching of these, as you say, these different realities that everyone perceives in a different way, I think that's also something you can soak in from an image. So like you are using it to work through this anxiety, I think someone else can also identify with that and feel it in the image. And I think that's why it's also next to the collaborative approach that you have through the surveys, or we can also talk about that. It's also that for me, when I counted the work, immediately there's these traces of experience that are also shared. So I think it really has such an important role in this time. And maybe we could talk about, we saw now in the few slides also different aspects, and you actually already in the slides you layered images, and we are working together also at the digital exhibition, where you really added like to make use of the options that are there to work online. So actually also your project doesn't only exist as a print, but it actually also exists online. There's different parts of it. Maybe to talk a bit about, for example, what we see here, like this, we have a data sheet, we have handwritten, just give us an idea what compiles all of these pieces.
I mean, the collages in themselves are very intuitive. Like, it's just like, what's it called, composing, like with colors and like what feels right. But yeah, I tried them to be very tactile. I think the project more and more, it's becoming like something you can touch, because again, I want to show that these emotions can be real and like can be felt and like seen. But it's like layering. So like, for instance, here it's like a neuroscientific study on the effects of love in the brain. Basically, the initial reaction of love is like a rush of dopamine, which feels like a lot of pleasure, but also like a drive and something that you need to get. So it's kind of like having thirst. Sometimes it can be out of control. And if you put together enough elements, like someone with a very traumatic upbringing, or like in a very difficult situation, this love can become obsessive or like just a dysfunctional relationship, and people can go to very extreme extents of what they can do. I was interested in that, how it's like a heightened state of mind and the crazy things people can do for love or in love.
Yeah, but yeah, it's interesting. I think you can feel this, like also with the, now you say you want it to be that it can be touched to feel, but it's also interesting how you translate it actually into the digital, that this feeling also is kind of there. We can see, we can delve into the image, we see the GIF moving behind it. So I think it's also really interesting how you're using this aspect of the online and, well, to translate it. And now there's things have developed also since you started with the project. And I thought also this is a nice moment maybe to give us an insight into how it has developed or where you are at. And you just launched actually the survey, all these feelings.
All these feelings, yeah.
So can you maybe just give us an insight into this new or like just freshly exposed part of the project?
For sure. So as I briefly explained, I come from a documentary practice, and I came to ICP to the new media program. So it's funny because it's very technology oriented in a way, but I'm not a technological person at all. Like I was born in 87. I'm like a 90s kid. And like many of these simple things like a GIF or whatever, they come like, they're not easy for me at all. But I do, that's why I also collaborate, because for instance, for this new part of the project, I'm collaborating with a data scientist. So like, there's things I can't do, but once you start letting other people in, then everything can expand like in a very good way. So for all these feelings, this is basically the data aspect. So like, I start with the project, it's very personal, but I don't want it to be about me. Like I want these to be relatable experiences, and I want this to bring insight and information. Like I have this very, like I was saying, like feelings, emotions are so important, but I also have an extremely rational side of me. And for me, like learning and understanding about love addiction, what love does in the brain, and just the experiences of others brings me understanding. And when you understand your situation, at least you know what's happening and it's not complete chaos and confusion. So what all these feelings looks to do is basically first like a safe space where anyone can, it's like we want it to be a introspective experience where you analyze your parents' relationship, your best assets, your most difficult assets in relationships, like your insecurities, the way you feel. And then we ask 6 questions where we assess your attachment style. So this is like a very simplistic way of looking at attachment styles, but it's basically to see how you attached in your current or last relationship. So what we want to do with this is like, if you were a very anxious person in your relationship or a very like avoidant person, these are like different attachment styles. Then once we map them out, we want the public to be able to navigate like this archive of emotions. And you can be like, oh, like I'm this very anxious person, but look how all these other anxious people were feeling at certain moments, or how these avoidant people were feeling, which were the other person. And like, I completely didn't like understand or have empathy for that other person's point of view. So it's kind of trying to bring that like a general point of view where we can all like feel empathy in the end.
Yeah, I find interesting how you also now describe it, this result, as something visual. So it feels like there's something to experience, and like, you know, really interesting and so curious also where this will lead. And I think, again, also to draw the parallel, it's your practice from maybe like being this internal reflection, being on your personal side, but then having the urge also to, again, translate it and take the learnings that you are creating through it and share them. And I find that's such a amazing thing to do, and also makes it so valuable, the work. I think it's I'm really fascinated by it, and I hope we can also talk a bit more about this now when we are going to be the 4 of us. Because this is now also like, I think a very interesting part when we are bringing you 2 together, or us, all of us together. And I wanted to start this by actually asking for you, Anna, now also having heard the presentation today, but also getting to know Leonard through the talent program, how do you actually what does it do with you to see his work? Or of course you already said a few things, but could you once more maybe delve into that a bit, how you reflect on his practice with the same similar experience in a way, or relatable experience?
Oh, I go first. Leonard, well, I mean, first of all, I feel complete admiration to like the level of detail and perfection. Like I can't even, yeah, it's amazing. But I also really like that. I feel like it's very resourceful, and I love resourcefulness. So it's like, it's grabbing whatever he finds around and making it majestic. And like, I think that's really cool because it's very humble in a way, you know, and like very relatable, but yeah, I love it.
And Leonard, same question for you. How did you feel to be paired like this, also under this topic, but also, yeah, how do you react to Anna's practice?
I mean, the first time I saw Anna's work, and then the first time I chat with her, I'm like, you look like my sister. It's just like, I find that sense of familiarity and bond. It's so funny to hear that you respond more to color than light. That's very interesting to me, because I feel like I pay more attention to light, because in my mind, like, how will I light this setup? I never think of it as like what color I want. Of course, color and patterns is part of me, but my guidance is usually like, okay, I'm gonna put a backlight over there, side light over here to make things pop out. So it's so funny to hear that your guiding principle is color, because when I see your work, I sense that feeling of being enveloped. So hearing you wanting to communicate what is in the inside so that it can be communicated, I totally get that sense of similarity when I look at your work, and it just feels like it's colorful and it's like a lot of life. It's like a lot of life, really. It's just like, I can relate. That was my first experience with Anna, and when this talk was set up, I was like, yes, of course, you know. So I already feel that sense of bond with Anna.
I'm happy to hear that. That's of course also for us, yeah, a success, let's say, to bring you two together and you feel comfortable by that. But Gem, now a bit to you, because of course you were also thrown into this. You knew Leonard's practice, of course, quite well already. How do you kind of see these parallels between the two practices or projects?
Yeah, I think it's such a generative pairing, and the more I've thought about it, the more astute it feels. And it feels like, although you guys are working in sort of different directions, you share a lot of core values. That's what kind of I kept coming back to. And first and foremost, I think I love how you said you like to turn the inside out, Anna, because for me, that's kind of what both of you do. You use photography or your art practice as this modality for self-healing and discovery. And so it's deeply, deeply personal, which requires from both of you this real commitment to vulnerability, which is not easy. I think in our kind of sharing culture, we think we're always sharing a lot of ourselves, but we're not. It's very surface. And the issues that you're both dealing with are much more complicated and much more personal. So I really see that you have in common. And I think one of the ways that I find the work so fascinating is how you've both kind of created a visual language or a visuality around emotions, which is not just for you. I know that's kind of part of your process, but in terms of us, the audience looking at the work, it feels like a lot of these things we don't really have the language for, or we feel insecure about, and we're not really sure how to communicate. And so you're giving us this visual language or this articulation of things that are a little bit more difficult to reach, a little bit more complicated. And I feel like that really resonates for me. I think especially in terms of the context of the theme of this talk and the pandemic and how isolated we were kind of just desperate for connection and desperate to we were all facing our own demons and, you know, having time isolated and going through that. So for me, both of you are offering up these ways to talk about the themes and the emotions that you're addressing through photography, which is really powerful. And I think as well, like, one of the most positive things about this is the way that you both kind of metabolize your own experience, and you both grow through making the work, which I think is so palpable with both of you and how you talk about it. And I remember there was a recent issue of Foam, I think it was a couple of issues ago, but it was talking about, you know, what can photography do now? How can it do more? How can we challenge it and push at the boundaries to make it more relevant and more powerful in society? And I feel like both of you are doing that. You're metabolizing trauma, you're metabolizing difficult emotions, and you're showing us how to build resilience and sort of imagining new possible futures. And that feels just so generative for us as an audience who get to experience your work.
And it's super important what you mentioned, because I think it's this kind of mediating the pandemic through another type of image. Because of course, what is prominent, maybe we're stuck at home, so we perceive the world through the media. So suddenly the media or media images and also photography became again a center of getting information, experiencing what is out there or what is going to happen. And I thought maybe we can reflect. I would really be curious how, for example, Leonard, with your work, you chose a very, like, instead of like calming it or being like straight out documentary, as you said it, you're going for the chaos, for the over for a bit of drama maybe, but can you maybe speak about also how that's for you in mediating this? Yeah, is so important.
Early on in the pandemic, my family in Indonesia, they kept asking me if I wanted to go back to Indonesia to be with them, to quarantine with them. And I was like, well, you didn't put me to school and make me work hard just to ask me to go home now, Mom. You know, like, it was so confusing to me because, like, growing up, like, you need to study really hard so that you can be sent abroad to study and then you can be independent. And then now she suddenly was like, are you sure you don't want to come back? I was like, okay, and clearly I see that the images that she sees of America, of Chicago, of the violence, they are so into WhatsApp. They get all of this bullshit from WhatsApp. Not bullshit, but like information that is not contextualized. They would get those all the time and they would just like, please don't get stabbed. Please keep your mask on. Don't fight with anyone. So hearing those early on, I was just like, well, as much as I love them and I want to be with them, I have made my life here. I'm not going back. But what I can do is show them the family that I have here, the home that I have here. So basically, what I would do with them when making photographs, going to their home and borrowing their pantries, fridge, and everything. Mom, I'm gonna do this to these people so that you can see how open they are and generous they are to me, and they allow me to go in their space and do all of this. So hopefully you can have a sense of calmness, but also I am also 32 now. Like, thank you for your concern, Mom, but it is very confusing to hear when suddenly your mom, please come back home and be with me. It's like, but at the same time, I also hear her concerns and fear. And also, there's no other way to show her otherwise, other than using photographs. Once I show her, these are my friends that I'm working with. And then suddenly her mind can see what it is that I'm doing. So all of those images from WhatsApp, from the news of people bloodied and stuff can be quiet down. Yeah. But that is really like their concern because they keep seeing all of these images that are not contextualized. Yeah. They would pull these images from a few years ago and say, oh my God, this is happening now. Be careful. Like, check Google, please.
Yeah, so it's really also shifting again how we then relate to the images, but then, as you say, it's the context around them. And I think, yeah, that's why it's also then interesting, maybe Anna, how you approached it, where you actually go through the data. So also then to say that through collecting data, through like looking at it, and that creating also knowledge for the sake of the project, that's also an interesting path to go, because of course both of you, there are similarities, but you still chose very different approaches on how to go about it. And I think in your practice, it's really interesting, this going to do data. And as you highlighted a few times, collaborating also through the data and bringing the knowledge in that you need to convey the message. Can you maybe say a bit more about this?
Yeah, well, this is my second long-term project, and on the first one, it was the more documentary one, and I also I ended up going into collaboration without knowing. And then with time, I've learned that also when you go through very traumatic experiences, one of the things that can happen so you can cope is that you start to over-connect. Or connection becomes very hyped in you. And I think I can be kind of introverted, but I can't explain what I feel when things start coming together that involve more than one person. And when the project becomes alive and it's kind of moving on its own, that gives to me feeling that a process is alive and feeding not only by me, it just makes me feel very alive, and I just naturally want to connect. And so for me, it's very important that this project of people can participate and build it along with me, so to speak.
I thought what could be interesting to talk about, and of course we touched about in a few of the things that you already said, but of course you become very prominent in your work. Even if you collaborate with others, a lot of the motivations are very personal. And I think it's this presence that you have in your work. There used to be this idea of a neutral photo, the neutral photographer, but here you do completely the opposite. You're not hiding in your pictures, you're right there. And I find it really interesting that this is also happening very proud in a way, being there and doing these things. And I thought maybe, Gem, could you confirm this observation on the one side, but also is this something, what do you think has triggered that in a way, or is this, maybe?
Yeah, I definitely noticed the same thing. I think, if you look back 10 years in photography, apart from a handful of famous photographers, we just looked at the pictures. We didn't really think about the lived experience of the artist. And even if the work was about the lived experience of the artist, in art criticism, it was kind of frowned upon to talk about the artist's life. It's we had to separate everything. And I think probably through the mediation of social media, we've seen a sort of breakdown in that wall. And now it's starting to be really vital to consider the lived experience of the artist when you're thinking about their work, and how that actually gives the audience so many more access points to the images, and so many different ways to reconsider or reflect upon the work. So I think it's a really exciting time for artists now to be really making this very personal and intimate work. It feels like it's a moment in time as well. It feels like we're moving into a kind of era where we're turning the inside out, as Anna said. I feel like that's just the perfect phrase. And that's kind of what we need, because we've been so isolated for so long.
What I find interesting, that is, of course, when this becomes so prominent and present, so the ideals, the values, the background of the artist, and I wonder, Anna, if you hear this, and of the one side, how do you identify with this, or how do you experience this on the side of the artist? But also, I assume it can also be not a danger, but it can also be something to be careful with, or that you encounter criticism. How do you experience actually being on the other side, putting your personal so much at the display of others?
Mm-hmm. I feel like, even though thank you, I really appreciate that my presence is there. I take that as a compliment, but I think I also hide a little bit in the work, because I want it to be more a collective experience than only about me. So even there's very, very personal things that happen in the project, but I don't necessarily reveal them. So I do think that being older and everything has helped me guard it a little bit as well, because you have to be careful also with what you expose. I feel I've seen some documentary stories that where sometimes people come full on, and I can't help but wonder if they're aware of all the implications that this has, because then it becomes a hot topic or it's reposted everywhere. And like when it comes to trauma, you are also re-traumatizing yourself the moment that you're re-exposed over and over to this. So yeah, there's things to be careful and take into consideration, and things that I've learned in the process of like that I would be less or more careful with in the future.
Leonard, I would like to ask you the same question. Of course, you speak with a lot of passion, and we can see that there is the moments in your projects that are already making you really also worked up. But is this something, how do you deal with this also protecting yourself in a sense?
Yeah, like I carried so much confusion just moving to America, and then I didn't start out wanting to be an artist. I just wanted a way out from Indonesia. So when I started taking art classes and then hearing the critiques that I got, I started feeling like, well, you keep saying that I'm exotic, but have you come to my home? All of these things are just basic everyday color and patterns. So, and as I spend more time and growing my confidence, now I can say, well, those critiquer, those people who gave me a hard time, they were just out of their time. They didn't grow up with the computer. They didn't grow up with like chat rooms. Like for me, like my understanding of love and sex and everything, I learned on the computer, on the internet. The only advice my mom gave me was, don't get a girl pregnant. That was the only sex education that I got from my mom, just because in the culture, we didn't know how to speak about intimacy and sex. So when I applied for green card, I married my partner. I started my green card application when Obama was the president. And although that I don't vote, I have a preference to submit myself to Obama, but I didn't have that option. So just thinking, okay, I have to submit my life. I have to submit important, vulnerable information about my bank account, about my intimacy with my partner. I have to submit proofs of my job. I have to submit proof of my love, photographs of me and Peter hanging out with his family. I have to submit all of that to a figure that I don't care for. So then with that insight, then I was just like, okay, if I'm already submitting myself and be vulnerable for people that I don't agree with, why would I limit myself to people that I actually wanna love, So I think just that experience just allows me to like, okay, I have a lot of shit that happened in my life, like all of these traumas, but why would I just hide it and make myself triggered and then crawl back in my space, It's really just that understanding of like, this is the way that I have lived my life. I have experienced all of this. Why would I wanna dim my power? I have all of these access that I've learned, like, why would I want to hold back? So I think that's really like the biggest lesson that I've learned in the pandemic.
It's so strong how you say this, and it's, of course, you said before, like you just said, I'm not going to be like hiding, I'm going out there and I'm going to be present. And I think that's really so strong, and that's also why the work, I think, gets this overwhelming responses. We can feel it. You can feel the confidence in the work. And I think I would like to ask a follow-up, because Gem referenced the
Can I say something?
Oh, sorry. This is why you
No, I really resonate with that, because I was thinking about that this morning. Like, all my life, I have felt like I'm too much. It's like, it's all these different situations where, like, for some reason or another, like, you're too much. Like, you need to. And it's so liberating to, at least in your art, like, for whatever reasons that was, like, you can see how you manage that throughout life. But, like, in your art, like, yes, I am too much and more is better. And here it is. So
yeah. And on that topic, I want to make clear that when I said it's easier to show what is possible than changing someone's mind, like, I'm doing this so that, like, the younger people that are going into photography, guess what? This is what I can do and so can you, you know, like I'm not trying to appeal to these old people that don't get chat rooms, that don't get like, they don't, I mean, of course, you know, like I went through that grad school experience where the way photography is seen, what the component of photography is very, yeah, and TikTok, like we live with TikTok now, like this is the world that we live in, and that is the way that I live and experience life, and I want to use all of that knowledge in my art making. So really, like I know I think it's my imposter syndrome when I feel like I am giving too much, but then I have to remind myself I have to give extra so that these younger generations that are feeling afraid or unsure, they can look and at least they can get something out of it. That's how I look at it, and that's kind of give me a sense of, okay, you're not doing too much, Anna. You are doing something for all of us, Yeah.
Thank you so much. I have actually a question from the audience that I would like to share from Colin Gray. He's asking Leonard, how do you go about creating these images? Are they from dreams? And how much input do your collaborators have in the creation?
The dream part, I mean, dreams are information that is in the brain to me, like whether I'm asleep or alive, awake or stoned, they're still coming from my head. So it's just a matter of like accessing what it is that I want to access and make it happen. So the way that I make work, I love the large format 4x5 film camera. The one I set the camera down and then I go back and forth in the frame to put everything in there until I feel good about it, and then I figure out how to best light it. That's kind of how my process is. And as far as collaboration, a lot of the inspirations come from my friends. Like, I think like to be inspired, it requires a sense of vulnerability and focus. And being able to occupy that space and be open to like, hey, somebody just told me that they ate so much Cheerios in quarantine. You know, just hearing that is so stupid, but I'm gonna make that a fantastical photograph. And then same thing with this photograph. I was like, well, I mean, I was thinking about Gursky, 99-cent store. Like, no one's ever gonna allow me permission to go to a department store and then set my camera down and take a photo out of it. Why don't I just do it with my trash? You know, so I just started doing it with my trash, like all of my soda cans, all of my meal containers, and then I just set it up. So really, at this point, I just try to be open and vulnerable, but focus in what I'm doing. But of course, I can't just make photographs every time of the year. I feel like right now is my, you know, after a year of output, I am tired. I need to learn from what I've already done and then figure out how to share my work and print it and make it in real life. That's like the natural stage for me right now. But that's kind of how I make work. An intense period of just all of this needs to be solved, either go back and forth in the frame to put things or to put color. But after the work is done, it's done. I'm gonna take everything down, and when I develop the film, I will get what I get. You know, I try not to be so fixated on the perfect image, because what I'm going after is consistency more than being perfect. Yeah. I hope that helps you, Colin.
Perfect.
No, it's a really good insight, and maybe I wanted to, because we talk, like so many things are coming up here when it comes to generation. We're talking about the power of art. There was the question, what can photography do, or what can it do more? And maybe to Anna, just to ask, I wonder, like this process of your practice, it is helping you to deal with this anxiety of this time, but would there have been an alternative if you would not be an artist? Because you just said that you found this. Do you think there was an alternative, or it's actually?
No, I don't. I don't think so. I mean, I think I say art is for the brave because it's very misunderstood. And like when you embark in like projects like these, like they're so consuming, like you give it all to it. But like at the same time, I guess the way we feel, it's kind of like so intense that like there's no real separation between the work and us, and like what we do is just like, so I guess no, there's no other, there's no plan B.
It's maybe a silly question, but I thought, you know, maybe the neuroscientist in you could have come through or something. But thank you so much. And we have actually another question in the chat, so I will just give one more. It's also for Leonard, but maybe it's for both of you actually interesting, because the question is like how conscious you are with the spatial layering, and is this something that you use often? But I think it can also relate also to the objects that you use. You say that there's these daily objects. Maybe you can just elaborate a bit on that.
I try to, the way that I think of it, I want to honor the space that I make my work in. So if I get to make work in someone's living room, of course I'm going to get to know them by like, okay, can I borrow this for the photograph? Can I pull that curtain? Can I use this and that? By doing so, I just break the ice. Like we get to know each other without that pressure of, okay, I am talking to you right now, tell me about your life. So I actually use art making as a way to connect with other people. And by doing so, I also get to honor the space that they have and also their belongings, because their belongings not only communicate their consent and participation, but it also communicates who they are, their personality, you know? So it's like I am just honoring my subjects and objects, and that is so, I just feel so grateful just even saying that, because otherwise I have to make everything from scratch. I have to just utilize myself. That's why I love art making, because it allows me to go out and connect with other people, and I get to honor them and make awesome work using their materials. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I was curious, Gem, because of course you had the pleasure to do the Q&A with Leonard, but I was wondering if you had also a question to Anna that was not yet touched upon that you'd like to share.
I guess I'm just so fascinated about your scientific background and how that intersects with your art practice. Would you be able to talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So first of all, Gem, like respects to you, your work, everything is amazing. My practice, and yeah, I think I'm a very interdisciplinary person, like by nature. I think studying biology really helped, but it's also like having this very rational side as well. So it helps me like the layering and all that. Yeah, I would like to experiment more with audio. Everything in this multimedia world is new to me, but I have like this very multimedia part, and then I also have the mixed media part with like, right now I work at a printing lab, so like, I've learned a lot about the materiality of things and working with my hands, which is also new. So yeah.
I had one other question, if that's okay as well. Because you work with kind of past lovers and friends, I'm curious how you know, that takes a lot. I think sometimes people kind of underestimate how much that takes to be in that vulnerable space and kind of relive some of those experiences. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you cultivate the confidence and the resilience to kind of move through these emotions and these sort of experiences that you've had through the artwork again, because you're kind of reliving it in some ways. In my head, that might be wrong, but
I'm there like 100% of the time, so it's more like an outlet than like having to go in there, really. Right. And yeah, thankfully I do keep like, for the most of it, like very good relationship with like really close friends, and also like past people I've dated. So it's also like they trust me in the process the moment that they agree to participate. And like we're both like in this experiment where we're not sure where it's gonna go, right? But it's a collaboration.
Oh, it's fascinating to hear.
Maybe I have a question for Gem, because of course you, through your practice and your writing, you really see a lot of different things and projects. And I was curious because on the one side, we talked now about how there was a shift to the person of the photographer, but then this moment that we're in, would you say that also this aspect of using artistic practice for this overcoming an obstacle or the healing, like, could you talk a bit more how you observe this, or maybe how things like this come past you maybe more often, or also, what this, just a bit.
I think how I started thinking about it is a little bit in relation to kind of what Leonard was talking about, in terms of a lot of the reference points that younger artists have are through digital media. And we're in every other industry, we talk about how technology has completely revolutionized and changed the way we think and feel and act and behave. But we don't talk about that so much in the art space or the photo space, beyond the sort of technical side of image making and what it's enabled us to do. So I think we're in this space where reference points there's almost like a bit of a black hole between people who didn't grow up as digital natives and people who did. Like, you just don't have the same reference points. And that's not to say everybody can't enjoy each other's works. They obviously can, but I think there's nuances there, because there's such a language in digital culture. Like you were talking about chat rooms, like there's such a language there. There's so much reference points. And you see now and again, MySpace keeps coming up, and how people learn then to sort of cultivate their space and kind of present their identity to the outside world. So I think some of this stems from the digital space, but I think I really started to notice it through the podcast that I do, because I initially started that to talk to younger artists. That was what I was really fascinated, and still am, a big focus in my career. But in the second or third season, I thought, I might just mix it up and speak to some really established artists and see how it goes. And one of the things that really resonated with me is that when I talk to young artists, we could have a very vulnerable conversation like we've had tonight. They would really open up. I would share my experiences as well, and we'd have this really generative conversation. But when I tried to have that with more established artists, I really hit a wall. And I think in some ways that's a PR thing, and how artists are trained, over the years, and they get used to saying a certain patter with their work. But I think there's also just this, they didn't grow up in a generation where we're used to sharing, and we're used to kind of talking about our experiences all the time. And that's what social media has kind of done to our generation and younger generations. And so, it's really interesting to see that barrier. And obviously I'm being kind of general, it's not true of everybody, but I did notice there is a bit of a trend in terms of where people are comfortable to talk about the kind of messy stuff, the real sort of gritty, hard, tough stuff. There's a lot of people that still opt to kind of have that veneer, which I understand, but I think it's one of the great things about millennials and Gen, the other ones, the younger ones. But I think it just opens up this potential to have much more intimate conversation, which I think we all need when we're mediated through screens all the time.
Yes, it's interesting what you say, and also how you highlight again also a little bit this generational thing that kind of emerges. And I think we noticed this as well as when we program or when we work in a museum, that it's these different audiences that are also different generations that you have to kind of bring together. And then with a project like Foam Talent, where we are actually working with artists that are in a younger generation, or in these generations that you just mentioned, that the bodies of work are really dealing with the issues of a specific generation. Well, probably the boundaries are not that strict anymore when the starts and ends, but it's really interesting that you also have to become conscious of that when working with the works and when presenting it and when discussing it, because some of the topics might not be relevant in all of the audiences. And it's we're slowly reaching the end, and so I wanted to do one last question that I will ask each of you, because of course this event was there to kind of give a free, an introduction in who you are and how you are connected, what are topics that are around your work, but this is actually an invitation to get to know your work better, and hopefully also for this conversation in some forms to continue afterwards with the audience and through interacting with your projects or your work. And so my final question actually would be, we start with Gem, what's up next? Where can people also follow you and what you're doing?
The best place to find me is Instagram for all its Floors, yeah, that's where I am a lot of the time. I spend a lot of time sharing the work of young artists and emerging talent. It's a big part of my practice. And then the podcast. So I host the Messy Truth podcast, which is all about candid conversations with photographers about all of that messy stuff that I was just talking about. I've just released a couple of episodes. One with Catherine Opie, which was really fascinating. She's definitely an artist who is not afraid to go there and share the real. And also with Coco Capitan, a fantastic fashion and art photographer. So they're the best places to find me.
And I can really recommend it because Gem's voice is something that is very familiar to me, but I have not actually encountered her face before we started talking about this talk. But her voice is very soothing to listen to. I can only recommend checking her out, her podcast. And well, for Leonard and Anna, there's of course something exciting in the making also on the side of Foam Talent, because we're working on a digital exhibition that is actually to be launched end of July, and you both are working hard on it. So this is something that I would already put out there, that you have to keep an eye on our socials to see what is happening with that. But Anna, we shared your survey, but maybe there's something else you'd like to plug for people.
No, definitely participate, like keep an eye on the Instagram as well, because we're planning for the people in New York, we're planning activities like in the parks and stuff where we want to get like people to be part of this and have empathy and many ideas like brewing. And hopefully in the fall, I would like to go deeper into the science as well. I think I missed the answer of that earlier on, but just to interview more scientists and everything. I feel like there's so much knowledge in the science sometimes that it's not accessible to the public. So hopefully this project can like make it a little, like democratize it a little bit for some people.
Thank you so much. And yeah, Leonard, what about you?
Same thing for me. Just go to Instagram. I mean, I'm just now working on the office stuff of art making, you know, and there are exciting things coming up. But as these things go, I can't really say anything yet. But just Instagram.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, all of you. It was great to have you here. And it's also great to kick this off, this first edition of the Zooming In. And well, I hope to see much more of you. And I've heard that Leonard is going to go maybe on a Europe tour. So I hope you to meet you in person, and Anna, I will have to come to New York. But thank you so much for being here with us.